Howdy howdy, I'm Cody and this is Creation Outdoors. Welcome to the channel and welcome to another video in our hunt breakdown series. If you didn't catch the last video in this series, the first video in this series, go back and check that one out because it was an awesome breakdown featuring 2 hunts from public land in Iowa from last year, 2021. That turned out to be pretty awesome. I was fortunate enough to get a great buck here in Iowa on public land, and it was just a really neat hunt, and just the terrain features and everything that we learned from that hunt was well worth your time. So go check out that video. But on this video, we're going back to the year 2020. Now, a lot went on in that year, and this hunt actually features the first week in November, starting with November 3rd, which was Election Day. So Election Day 2020 is where we're going to start off this hunt breakdown. Now, if you can remember all the way back to 2020, in the first week of November, it was extremely hot. Now, I was in Minnesota at the time, and I was hunting on this piece of private land which I had access to. Now, there was about 10 of us that were bow hunting this private land, which was only about 150 acres, so it was relatively high pressure for private land. 70 degrees, but it was the first week of November, so we had to get out there. So that week, 70 degrees, super warm, quite windy, not ideal for what you would normally want for the first week of November. The rut is supposed to be in full swing. We're looking for cold fronts normally, but the rut is the rut, and deer are going to be moving whether or not you're out there. And I think in this case, it turned out to be that we were in the perfect spot. So what does that spot look like? So I'm going to bring up the map here, and this is the actual location where I was hunting. So similar to the last video, I'm showing you the real spot because I think that's going to be the best for you and for me, so that we can reflect and learn and utilize these things moving forward so that we can all be successful this coming fall. So here's the map, and as you can see, this pin is where this week is going to focus. And so there are 3 particular hunts in this case that were really beneficial for me for learning this spot and for making this outcome positive with a nice buck on the ground. And so as you can see, it looks as though we're hunting a field edge spot, but it really does not hunt like a field edge. And in this case, if we zoom in a little bit, I was in a pine tree just off the field edge, and I was actually looking to the south here. So I wasn't even looking at the field, but the day before I started sitting this spot, this, which was a cornfield at the time, was combined. So there was some disturbance in the area, and I'm sitting in this pine tree overlooking this ridge. So this is a big ridge system, and on my way in there, I was able to sneak in pretty quietly because this was all dirt. And there were several scrapes right on this line, and there was a number of rubs right on the top of this ridge. And so I had the benefit of knowing that deer generally travel the top of this ridge, kind of going, west to east in this case, in front of me. And my hope was that with it being 75 degrees and a south wind, the wind was kind of blow up this ridge, and I would catch a buck traveling the top portion of this ridge, maybe scent checking some of this thicker bedding cover, which is down here. Now, what I know now in hindsight is that this all in this region is all tremendously thick bedding cover as well. And so that really played into our favor. So November 3rd, I get into the stand quite early. It's warm, 15 to 20 mile an hour south wind. I sat there for quite a while up until the last hour before dark, and then movement started. So I began hearing some commotion, some footsteps through the leaves and things off here to my left toward this bedding area. And what happened is that a small buck actually ended up kind of skirting on this edge and heading down this ridge. So I wasn't able to get a shot. There was too much brush here, and he stayed in the brush up until he was out of what I was comfortable at the time shooting. So just a small buck, headed down, but I knew that there was more going on, and I thought that I had seen 2 more deer kind of in this thicker area. Well, lo and behold, not too much later, a quite nice buck, one that I definitely would have shot at the time, did the exact same thing. So I caught movement over here, kind of in this thicker area, and he ended up kind of following the same path of that smaller buck. And you know, again, no shot. I ended up getting on the buck, and I was at full draw twice, actually, because my hope was that he would come across this opening, which he never did, or work in front of me, but again, never did. Just worked his way down this path. And so that was really the first night. So that was Tuesday, you know, 2 bucks on their feet. There was quite a bit of commotion. I figured that there was maybe a doe in there, and it just was enough activity that I thought it was the right spot, and I would come back the next night. So Wednesday, November 4th, same weather conditions. So 70 degrees, upper 70s, and again, a strong wind from the south. So 15, 20 mile an hour blowing up this ridge and towards this field. And again, same hope, and especially with the activity I had seen the night before, seeing 2 bucks on their feet in this area when the weather wasn't really ideal, I decided to sit here again. And I knew that I was maybe pushing it a little bit because you never really want to burn out a spot. But it's the first week of November, and if there's a hot doe in there, a lot can happen. So I got in there really early on Wednesday. And it was about 1:30 in the afternoon when I started hearing some grunting. So again, from this thicket where I figured that deer were potentially bedding, I heard grunting and snorting, and I was on high alert, you know, very early in the day. So again, it just gives you evidence, like the last hunt in Iowa where I got the buck at about 1:30 in the afternoon. You know, those midday time periods during the rut can be really beneficial. But I was on high alert for about an hour before that deer actually stepped out. So a small buck ended up pushing a doe kind of around this direction and then back again down this ridge. And there's actually a trail system just over the crest here, which I know now after exploring later. But I didn't know at the time, and I had been hearing other activity both the Tuesday and the Wednesday, I think just over the ridge, and so, you know, I potentially could have moved down here, but there wasn't really any suitable trees because everything's pretty brushy, and you'll see from some of these video clips that I was in just about the only tree that I could have gotten in at the time. Nonetheless, pretty exciting. So a small buck pushing around a doe. At this point it's November 4th, so I'm like, sweet, a hot doe in the area, we're definitely going to be in business. A little bit later in the night, again, I started hearing movement over here to my left, and I actually see slinking through here a doe, and so I was like, okay, that's kind of neat, and I figured that she was headed out to this combine cornfield to feed. Now, that was a little bit unfortunate for me because remember that the wind was coming from the south. So anything that ended up making it out of this tree line was behind me and they were going to catch my wind. And so I knew that this is the direction that the doe was headed. And sure enough, right behind her was a good buck. And it actually, foreshadowing, was a buck that I'd have another chance at. But he ended up slinking right over here, 25 yards away, just to my left, and I didn't ever have a shot. I couldn't shoot through there. I didn't have any shooting lanes, and it just didn't work out. I think he ended up catching some of my wind here because he actually never really came out into the field. He just kind of hugged the tree line and ended up going back into this thicker kind of crevice here where I think some bedding is. Now, the doe did actually make it out into the field, and she did wind me and kind of bump off. So I was a little bit bummed because it was definitely the hot doe. The buck was right on her trail, and I thought that I had really messed it up. So that was about it for the night, other than another fawn, which read the script and moved right in front of me. But that was just information. Nonetheless, that was the night for Wednesday. So another encounter with the shooter buck. Definitely a hot doe in the area. Lots of activity here, regardless of the weather, which was supposedly really, really poor. So that moves us to Thursday. So Thursday, we actually had a shift in the weather. So the wind started to come from the west, which would have blown my scent from this tree stand right into where all this activity was coming from. So I knew that I didn't want to sit here, so I actually sat on the other edge of the property, and I didn't have any movement. It was 70 degrees again, except a west wind rather than a south, so conditions were pretty similar. But it just goes to show that when you are in the right area of deer activity during the rut, that's the spot to be. And sometimes you happen to luck into those spots, and sometimes the sign leads you there. So in this case, it was a little bit of both. There was a lot of hot sign there with rubs and scrapes, and I happened to luck into the area where there were hot does in this, utilizing this bedding area, and the bucks were there too. So nothing really happened on that Thursday, with the exception of perhaps the most crucial thing. As I was coming out of that other spot, the farmer came in and tilled this cornfield. So it had been combined on Monday right before I sat there, and he was tilling it on Thursday night after dark. So what I did was I came in and I cut a shooting lane here to my left. So as I mentioned, that buck kind of snuck through, and I had seen some other deer activity to my left, and I was never able to get a shot. So I cleared out a shooting lane between these two pine trees so that I could shoot to this trail that that buck and doe had used. And that proved to be pretty crucial. So I used that disturbance of the farmer to go in there and do some trimming so that I could get a better shot opportunity if something was coming out of this bedding area towards the corner of this field. So Friday, crucial day, because the shotgun season started in Minnesota on Saturday. So this was my last chance to get in here and get it done. And thankfully, the wind shifted back to the south. So again, I had the same wind that I had before. Again, it was really warm, and I decided to sit this tree. I didn't know how it was going to turn out because of the disturbance of the tractor, and I was in there, several days before, but I had given it 48 hours. I was really unsure about the sit, but the most recent information told me that this is the area that the does were using for a bedding area, and so the bucks were going to be in there as a result. The whole evening was quite quiet, besides for the wind. In terms of deer movement, there wasn't much going on, and I had just about given up on the night, and I was just kind of sitting it out. I had actually filmed kind of an exit interview where I'd pretty well closed things out, and that was going to be that for bow season before the gun season started in Minnesota, and I knew it was going to only get tougher from there. But shortly after that, I happened to hear something, I think, and look over to the left, and that same buck from Wednesday was sneaking on that trail, and he was in the shooting lane that I had cut. So I didn't have time to turn on the camera. I stopped the deer, got drawn back, and shot, and he was on high alert and happened to duck the arrow, so I needed a follow-up shot, but nonetheless, I was able to get that buck in that spot. And I was full of mixed emotions, super proud that I used that disturbance to clear those shooting lanes to give myself an opportunity. Glad that I went back to the spot, even though it could have very well been burned out, but bummed about the shot placement and bummed that I had to do a follow-up shot. And again, it was super warm, so I wasn't able to get a whole lot of footage or pictures in the field that were very high quality, and I just had to get him field dressed and go over to Sean's house. If you've followed the channel for quite a while, you'll know who Sean is. And the camaraderie following that was pretty special, so I'm glad about that. So got to Sean's house, and we got the deer broken down because it was 70 degrees, and the meat was the most valuable part of the deer at that point. So priorities took over. But nonetheless, it was a great hunt. So this was another week in the woods where I used terrain features to my benefit, sitting up next to a bedding area with kind of a crosswind, so that the deer would be able to work their way in front of me, and I was able to get out of there before the deer started utilizing this cornfield at night for feeding. And the biggest thing is use some of these disturbances to your advantage. So a classic example is what took place here. So a farmer is in a field, whether that's combining or working the field, what have you. Use that to either access your tree stand or your sit for the evening or morning, or use that disturbance to get out unnoticed without spooking a whole bunch of deer. In this case, I used it to trim a shooting lane, which turned out to be crucial for the success of this hunt. And I'm just glad that I was able to stumble into this rut activity and stay just on the outskirts enough so as to not screw it up. So those are my takeaways from this second hunt breakdown. If you want to see the videos that are featured in this hunt breakdown, I'll put those in the description below, as well as the first video in our hunt breakdown where I did get that Iowa buck on public land, as I mentioned earlier. And so I hope you found this helpful. I hope you can have some takeaways that might help you this upcoming season. And if you found it helpful, I'd appreciate it if you would like and subscribe so you catch the next hunt breakdown, which is coming next week from another Minnesota hunt. And if you have any questions about this area or anything that you're thinking about, implementing this fall, leave those in the description below and I will get you an answer, because I appreciate the camaraderie, and working together for success this fall is what we're all about here at Creation Outdoors. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.